All right, it's 11:10. If anyone's having technical issues, just throw it in the chat, and we'll do our best to solve it there. If you don't mind, keep your mics muted. And when I get to a spot, there will be a little section where we'll do a little Q&A. I'll open it up for a Q&A. I'm not 100% sure on how well the timeline will go on this, so we'll just do our best to keep it all underneath an hour on that. So let's go ahead and cruise to our first little slide here. If you guys don't know me, I got my CDL in 2005, worked in a warehouse, did a bunch of grocery delivery, all of those fun things, a lot of the labor part. As I progressed through there, we all know companies needed drivers, and where I worked, they didn't want to train their own people, so I just kind of opened my own school. That was in 2016. A little before that, I became a state tester. I did that for 5 years, gained a lot of knowledge and understanding on that piece of the business, which really helped me with the school part. When COVID hit, we all know documentation when it came to files and papers and stacks of stuff. It was not fun when you couldn't go to work. So, right, creating solutions to help where you don't have stacks of paper, because when your industry is regulated by FMCSA, right, the DOL, the DPS, VA, all that stuff, paperwork just becomes way too overwhelming. September is when we started the CDL PowerSuite endeavor. ELDT started in 2022 when those requirements came out, the ELDT.com. And then the CDL ID, if you guys don't know, that's a website that you can actually pull MVRs from all 50 states. I created it solely on a convenience to where if you're hiring someone or you have a student that's out of state, right, and they're supposed to start on Monday and they can start because they don't have an MVR, if you require those, that they can get it within 5 minutes through that website and hand it right to you. So it's a little more expensive to get the MVR through there, just to cover the cost of the third-party people, but it was solely created as a convenience. It wasn't created to be cost effective. It was just created as a quick convenience for students. So that's a little bit about me. The lady on the chat, Angie, with the same last name as me, is actually my wife. She was a first grade teacher for 17 years and then realized that I was creating more things than I could handle. And she came on board to help me out. And she actually runs the CDL school now, Drive 509. And I run the software side to help you guys on that part. So it's it's really great finding good team members to be a part of this journey, All right, we'll cruise to the next one over here. And I think everybody can see my slide. I got my little screen here that shows all of that. Okay, so the goal for the webinar today, right, is to understanding FMCSA's training provider requirements that pertain to document retention, CDL instructor requirements, facility requirements, and right, the biggest question of all, what like a lot of schools and people ask, what is proficient? And we'll dive into that piece on there because that's a big part of submitting people to the TPR. Topics to streamline, outdated workflows. I'll talk a little bit about utilizing your equipment and your instructor hours. If anybody is not paperless in their enrollment procedures by now, you really should find some solutions for that. If you don't have one, I promise you it'll make your life so much better. And then the last one we have here, I've got some really cool tools. They're called Instructor Insights, that they're essentially created analytics that tie your instructors' time they train to your trainees to create essentially their pass rates based on the instructors they're with. It's a really great ability to hold everyone accountable in the process. All right. Would you pass an audit today? That's a big question. We ask schools, like, how are you documenting things today that would, if FMCSA walked in the door, what would they say? I think about 2 or 3 months ago, I had an opportunity to meet with 2 auditors from Tennessee that are essentially hired, right, to do audits at school, and their focus was in Tennessee. But I called them up and was like, hey, I want a meeting with you because I want to know, right, what is FMCSA looking for? Is there anything in the regulations that they're bringing up that we should have on file? And for the most part, everything in the regulations, what it states in there was exactly what they're looking for. The main goal that they were looking at to simplify stuff was that the data you had on file matched exactly what the CFR said, right? So if you were to check off on backing for straight back, your document said backing straight back, and it was checked off. If it was the theory part, right, 1.1, 80% pass rate, and then they had their checkbox 1.1, 80% pass rate. So a lot of it was just lining up the dots on that, but I'll dig into some of the paperwork requirements also and retention on that. So what do we got here? Review FMCSA requirements for being listed on the TPR, trainer documentation requirements, student required documentation, documenting student proficiency, and record retention once training is complete. Down here, and I will share this webinar after this. This is actually a little link to all of the FMCSA CFRs where you can actually read through them if you get really bored one day. What does FMCSA want from you as a training provider? So let's see what that looks like. Curriculum. Follow a curriculum that meets the applicable criteria set forth in A through E of Part 380. If you guys go up on the CFRs and you look in this stuff, you'll see, right, Class A, Class B to A. They have slightly different criteria. The Class B just has right now like the coupling and non-coupling stuff in it. And the Class B to A actually just removes the stuff that would have been in Class B. I think it's just some of the stuff in Section 5, like 5.2, 5.3, some of the medical card stuff. So everything that would be covered in getting a Class B, they don't repeat the process in the Class A curriculum part of it. Facility piece of it, and I'm just kind of cruising through these, so we've got our little points here. The facility piece, FMCSA, right? They just want to see that the place you're actually conducting business is a legal place of business that has bathrooms and those sorts of facilities. I've been cruising around the US, seeing all kinds of different schools and stuff, and it's been really great to do that. Some people have a portable, right? Some people have this big fancy building, but the goal is, right, if you can put a business license on your wall, obviously, based on FMCSA, that's really just what they're looking for, is that state and local structure of regulations. Vehicles used for training. Some people that have schools have had a logistics company before, right? So they've hauled freight and all those things. So they actually understand the whole process behind owning vehicles. DOT MC 150, right, is registering all your vehicles, whether they're IFTA or IRP if you're going over state lines. So a lot of this section 3.8, 711 pertains to you registering your vehicles per FMCSA's regular requirements outside of, you know, what the school requirements are for being a training provider. So if you have background in logistics, this piece right here is a no-brainer for you. If you guys have questions on all of this stuff, if you have schools in multiple states and you're not too sure about IFTA or IRP and how to do those things, I can always show you those things later and how to do that. And then training vehicles must be in the same group and type of trainings intended to operate, right? All that's saying is, right, if you're gonna get a school bus, show up with a school bus. If you're gonna get a Class A, show up with a Class A with a trailer. If it's gonna be a stick, train the guy on a stick and show up with a stick for the test. Just equal vehicles equal on your test. Certified instructor. Utilize your training instructors that to meet the criteria set forth in 380. I'll go over that piece right there. This is actually what it says. The trainer must have a CDL license and be certified, registered, and are authorized to provide training following the applicable laws and regulations of any state where in-person training is conducted. So that's an obvious one, right? Need to see a license to be certified. So this depends on the state. When they say certified, there's really no actual certification, but if your state has different regulations, like here in Washington state, we're just required to register them with Washington. Really what it is us giving Washington a, it would be a resume that shows that they've driven for at least 2 years. And they just need proof of that, and then we're allowed to use them as our instructors. Some states do have requirements to become a CDL instructor and actually train people, and some states don't have any at all. So when they don't have any at all, right, where you just go for the minimum requirements FMCSA requires, which holds a CDL of the same or equal value with endorsements necessary to operate a commercial motor vehicle for which the training will be provided, and has at least 2 years of experience driving a commercial motor vehicle, right? So the person in the passenger seat, minimum 2 years experience, obviously having a CDL of equal value. So if they've been a school bus driver for 2 years, then they can train someone have a school bus. If they've got a Class A and they just got a school bus like a week later, for them to be able to train that person on a school bus, they want them to have that same license and endorsement for 2 years to train that person on there. As far as classroom theory can be conducted online through registered training provider or in class. And there's actually a couple exemptions to this. We all know it's not always easy to find instructors, right? Good quality instructors. So sometimes the pool of retired people make really great opportunities. Retired people don't always keep up their medical cards or their CDLs. but they have tons and tons of experience. So for them to go back and get their CDL or go back and get their medical card, right, is not always the easiest thing for them. But if you read in the CFRs, this little section right here, the only place they're actually required to have a CDL for 2 years is when they're on the road, public roads, doing behind the wheel time. They can actually do class time and they can do range time with not having a CDL, as long as it was never suspended or revoked, and they did have it for 2 years. If you have any questions on this one, this little law right here, if you look it up, 380.605 is the one that states the exemptions on there. I didn't type this, I just grabbed this right off of that website. So if you know people that are retired and they want to work a couple of days a week in the yard to help people with pre-trips, they can do that. They can open back up. They just can go out onto public roads, obviously. So this is actually a really fun one to pull some people in. We actually have 3 retired drivers that are above 65. One of them actually, I think he's in his 80s. They still have their CDLs, but if they didn't, we could still utilize them for those 2 things. Submitting records to the TPR, electronically submitting records to the TPR. If we've all gone into the FMCSA TPR and submitted theory, their range time and their road time, obviously we should all know how to do that by now. If you are still logging into the FMCSA portal and doing those, essentially it's like 27 or 29 points of data for theory, road, and range for each one of those pieces. We do have a tool that is integrated with the TPR where it takes the current information you've already collected and pushes it over there. So if you are doing that manual submission, I beg you to stop. It's really painful, and it's not necessary to do anymore. Audit and or investigation. So allow FMCSA or its authorized representative to audit or investigate the training provider's operations to ensure that the provider meets the criteria set forth in this section. So all the things that we've just gone over in this little snippet is essentially what FMCSA wants you to do before you can get submitted on the TPR, right? Or not submit on the TPR, before you can get listed as a registered training provider. One of the criteria is if you don't allow FMCSA auditor to investigate your training program, you can be removed from the TPR list. So if they want to walk in your front door, check your records, you have to let them. Listed on the TPR, when a provider meets the requirements, these are the requirements we just went over. FMCSA will issue the provider a unique TPR number and, as applicable, add the provider's name and contact information to the TPR list. So those pieces we just went over are essentially the breakdown of what does it take to be on the TPR. All right, you are now listed on the TPR training provider registry. That's actually, I think, the simplest part of the whole thing. And does anyone have any questions on that part you'd like me to go back over? All good. If not, no big deal.
There were some specific questions on different state requirements for instructors, one in particular on Oregon, if they differ at all from the FMCSA standards.
Yeah, so every state, right, they may or may not have their own minimum requirements. So a lot of times your DOL, there's also, it's called like the DPS. If you have to be registered with the education board, they may also have minimum requirements for instructors. So I would say based on your state, it's good to look into, like, our laws are called WACs to see what they say. More honestly, when you register your school there or a company to do training, they should have that information for you. But there's really not too many states that have any additional requirements over the 2 years. Somebody asked, Denise, how can you find where your name is listed on the TPR and your TPR number? So if you hop onto the FMCSA website, you can actually just click in Google FMCSA, I think, registered training providers, and that main page will actually take you here. Let's see, I'll pull that up. See if I can pull it up for you. There we go. So FMCSA TPR registry. If I click on this little guy, you can put in your provider name right here, and it'll search and show you where it's at. So let's see if I put in Drive 509 and click search on here. Let's see here. What do they have? There is Drive 509 right there. And it looks like it has on that one on there, and it should show actually the in-person one as well. So let's do this. Let's look at it this way. This thing doesn't always work the best. As you can see, it's pretty massive. There's 6,000 of them on here. But if you do throw your name in here, you can see you'll come up in this little search list right there. There you go. So there would be ours right there with our address. So whatever yours is, just throw your name in there and do the little search on it. As far as your number goes, when you log into your account, you're going to have identifiers inside there that will show you that. That stuff is the private information. Somebody asked, are you aware of the regulations regarding assistant training trainers regarding minimum experience? We're looking to train individuals to get their CDL and then work as assistant trainers. I have not heard anything on assistant trainers, and I have not seen anything or any updates in the CFRs that talk about assistant trainers on that piece on there. I guess think of it this way. If you're going to submit hours of road time or training time in the yard, you submit the hours conducted with a certified instructor. If someone in your yard is going over pre-trip with someone and those actually aren't hours you're submitting to the TPR, I don't believe it really matters what you're doing, right? On that part. If you have, like it says on here, an assistant trainer and you submit all of their time under the assistant trainer's name, I'd really like to see what assistant trainer means, because I've not seen that before. So if you do have any more information on that, I'd love to learn about it. Yes, the assistant trainer would support the main trainer. Yeah, I would just say I've never heard of that. It doesn't mean it exists at all. But the hours submitted to the TPR, they want a certified instructor on that piece. Assistant trainer, someone that helps with something, but it is not associated with the hours submitted to the TPR. I could see that work because that training isn't documented as being signed off by a certified instructor. I think that's all of them. Did I get all of them, Angie? I think so. All right, cool. We'll move on to the next piece on here. Okay, so now you're on the TPR, right? Now it's about staying on the TPR, right? Actually keep everything up to par, all of your documentation, all those fun things when FMCSA walks in the door and says, hey, I need all of your documents. So getting on the TPR, you don't need really anything, right? Just submit your stuff to them. They approve you, you're on there. Now it's about staying on the TPR. If you guys don't know, if any of you are involved in like CBTA or any of those organizations, you can get a lot of insight on information. FMCSA has been ramping up their audit people, even hiring Homeland Security as being part of that process to audit schools to get them help. So these regulations are here. They've been there for 2 years now, and now they're finally coming around to start seeing what people are doing as far as documentation goes. Okay, how to stay listed on the training provider list. So this snippet is just going to be a quick little overview. A lot of the stuff we talked about in the beginning, but this is going to be like, now that you're training people, what are you supposed to have on record? So the first part here meets the requirements of this section. This is what we went over in those slides, which is essentially everything we needed to submit ourselves to be on the training provider list. That stuff always stays consistent. And if you are registered on the TPR, you have gotten this little biannual update to re-register. So every 2 years, they're going to send you an email to re-register to stay on the TPR. I think that's right. That's just going to, their goal probably is to get rid of ones that were registered on there that aren't doing anything and to reduce that list. I believe there's like 30,000 registered training providers on that list, which is a lot. But what I have learned, if you register as a traveling provider, you're actually, they put your name on there 50 different times because they register you with every single state. So if you were to take the 4 or 5,000 traveling providers and you multiply them by 50, you can kind of see why there's actually so many people on there. So if you haven't got this little email and you've been on there for 2 years, I would log in and see if you need to update your TPR. Please update your biannual form. Set a reminder on your calendar. Don't miss it. FMCSA sends out automated email letting you know it's time for you for your biannual update. And what I did realize is when you do update it, they still do send you the email after that. So if you get the email again and you're like, I already updated it, they just have it to auto send. Documentation and record retention. So this has everything to do with you training the person from day one, collecting information, and then keeping that information for on file for 3 years. So this part right here is essentially you as an administrator, the person in the office. This is 100% right, your duty to keep these documents for 3 years. So document record retention, the documentation and retention of records required by this subpart apply to entities that meet the requirements of subpart G of this part, and it's eligible for listing on the TPR Training Provider Registry. So all this just means is when you register for the TPR, you are this part right here, and you now have these requirements. Facility documentation, maintain documentation of state registration, certification, verifying that the provider is authorized to provide training in that state. So keep up your business license, education board license, anything that would pertain to having business legal in your state. If required, FMCSA is authorized representative may complete an audit or investigation of the training provider. So same thing, they're allowed to come in the door and check out your records. Ensure that all required documentation as outlined in 38725 is available to FMCSA or its authorized representative upon request. The provider must submit this documentation within 48 hours of request. I would say if you didn't have an efficient system, 48 hours is not a lot of time to grab all of your papers unless you just hand them a massive shoebox or file cabinet. Changes to your program. So if you make any changes to your program, which they identify on here as key information, is defined as training provider's name, address, phone number, types of training offered, training provider status, and if applicable, any changes to state license, certification, and or accreditation status. So any changes to your business, if you go onto your FMCSA website and log in, there's a place that you can update your information there. Changes must be reported by electronically submitting an updated entry-level driver training provider registration form. It's literally just going online and you can update your information there, and then it'll say pending, and then they'll approve the information in a couple of days. So keep your info up to date. Training documentation. This part I'm going to go in a little bit of detail on because I think it's a little confusing to a lot of people. Training documentation, self-certifications by all accepted applicants for behind-the-wheel training that they will comply with US DOT Department of Transportation regulations in these parts. So essentially what they're saying, if you have a logistics company and you were to hire a regular driver, like your instructor, there's regulations around them, right? Like doing a drug test, putting them in a consortium pool, all of that fun stuff. But what FMCSA says, and I've talked on the phone and by email to clarify this piece, is they call it self-certification, which honestly to me is really a frustrating situation. Self-certification just means that the person just signs a piece of paper that says I self-certify that I have a medical card, that I've taken a drug test on there. And is there, yep, I think that's it on that. Is a medical card, yep, and my driving record is good. They actually don't have to provide the information. They just have to give you a piece of paper that says they self-certified themselves. What FMCSA wants you to have a copy of the driver training commercial learner's permit, CLP, and or commercial driver's license as applicable. They want you to have a copy of their permit and their driver's license, and this little piece of paper that they sign that says they will do these things. Training providers must verify that all accepted behind the wheel applicants and or Theory A class instruction upgrade curriculum applicants hold a valid CLP or CDL. So obviously, if they're upgrading, they'll already have a CDL, and if they're first time getting it, they'll have the CLP. Documenting proficiency, theory training. Trainers must achieve a theory score of 80% or higher on all required modules for the type of CDL they're obtaining. Digital or paper documentation must be kept on file for those. So you got all your 31 lessons, right? You just make sure that every single one of those, you have documentation that's over 80% on that piece. Documenting proficiency behind the wheel range. On that one, behind the wheel range, the instructor must document and sign off on all instructors' proficiency. The training must demonstrate proficiency in the units listed below: vehicle inspection, pre-trip, in-route, post-trip, straight line backing, alley docking, offset backing, parallel blind side, parallel sight side, coupling and uncoupling. The state exam in every single state does not require you to uncouple and couple a vehicle together. I have gone to multiple schools where they actually do not teach coupling and uncoupling, which is very unfortunate. The CFRs require you to teach coupling and uncoupling. I would highly suggest if you have a training program that you teach this, you have it marked off as a proficient task for that person. Just because it's not on the test doesn't mean that you're not required to do it. These are FMCSA requirements. The test requirements are the state test requirements. Digital or paper documentation must be kept on file for 3 years. So when your instructor signs off on someone, just know they have to have that documentation for 3 whole years. Behind the wheel time, same thing. Document training's proficiency for behind the wheel and road modules listed below. And here are the modules right there that most of us have all gone over. Make sure you have documentation that they pass these things. And this is where if you had a piece of paper where you were writing off proficiency for a person, that you would want that piece of paper to say, visual, or let's just say unit 3.1 vehicle controls. Tom is proficient in unit 3.1. Tom is proficient, right, in shifting the transmission, communication. So if you align those perfectly with the CFRs, the goal is when the auditor walks in, he has his checklist, your paper matches his checklist, and he just is on his way. Just keep it simple. FMCSA required training documentation. FMCSA only requires you to have a copy of the trainee's CLP and CDL. And I've gone a few rounds with FMCSA, like I said, on this requirement to verify that what they had stated was accurate. FMCSA minimum requirements do not require training providers to have proof of a negative drug test or a copy of the trainee's DOT medical card or MVR. They want a copy of the CLP, the CDL, and a piece of paper is equivalent or is good enough self-certifying that they will do those things. FMCSA says trainees can be self-certified. That's those pieces right there. So I asked FMCSA, what is self-certified? Their definition was essentially, what is the definition of self-certified? The practice of making an official declaration that something complies with regulatory standards and or procedures without independent that's a big word there, right, for me, evidence, substantiating evidence. So they actually don't have to have proof of that. And then my question is, does FMCSA minimum requirements protect your business? Does it protect my business on that piece? My answer for that is no, and it'll always be no. You have FMCSA requirements, and I like to call these best practices, right? And we can always just do the minimum requirement, or we can do a little bit better, just like our training with our students. What is best practice to cover your company or business you work for? So most schools that I've worked with, they do collect a lot more information, which is really great, and it's great to see. Why should I have a best practice list? Why should I spend extra time collecting more documents? There's a huge reason why. To cover essentially your funds, right? Yeah, if you get into an accident or something and you don't have a positive or a negative drug test on a student, I would really hate to go to court in that situation. It would not be good. What is considered best practice? Across the board, you could say, just like when you hire an actual driver, you need a copy of their driver's license. If they only had a permit, right, you get a copy of their CLP, their CDL, motor vehicle record, DOT medical card, DOT drug test. The drug test is for you to verify that that person, right, in the last week hasn't been doing any drugs. When they go sit in that driver's seat and drive your vehicle on the road, your insurance is already high enough. That just really helps you make sure that you're putting qualified people in the seat, and also qualified people that can get hired. The DOT medical card, if the guy doesn't have a DOT medical card and you can't verify that he has that because he self-certifies himself and he really never got one, as you can see, the guy had a really hard time getting hired as soon as he was done with your training. Motor vehicle records. For me, motor vehicle records is a moral situation. I will never let anyone into my school that I know that they are not hireable. If they have multiple DUIs and they know like they're not going to get a job anywhere, is extremely unfair to take their funds without trying to at least figure out where they are hireable. So the motor vehicle record really is an eye opener for the trainee to know what does his future look like as a truck driver, or did you just train him and he'll never be a truck driver because no one's going to hire someone with 3 or 4 DUIs. One of the other things, if English speaking is in question, it's always good to do an assessment test. Most community colleges provide free assessment tests you can send them to go do. and get a little piece of paper back that shows that their English language, I believe, is like usually about a level 3 is what you want. When it's in the CFRs, if you get pulled over by a DOT officer, you are required to speak in English. So having that student be able to speak English is important for his future. So driver's license, I just went over a couple of these things, verify that the trainee has a valid driver's license, right? That's why we want to copy of that guy. Ensure that he's of age. Does the trainee have restrictions on their license? Do they have any interlock or restrictions on their license? We've seen this a few times where people would come in with interlock restrictions on there. So in those situations, you have to figure out, is this person actually allowed to drive or is this person not allowed to drive? Pull the MVR with the driver's license the trainee is provided. So meaning make sure whatever license you guys are using to give him a CDL, that you're using the same license number and it's not from a different state. Commercial learner's permit, verify the CLP has the correct endorsements as attached. Nothing worse, right, than taking a new person out on the road and you realize, a few days later, this person failed their air brakes and they actually shouldn't be driving this truck. So verification of that CLP you have on record. Motor vehicle records. This is why it's important to see a motor vehicle record. Is the person you're training able to get a CDL? Would their past record prevent them from obtaining a CDL? Getting the training's MVR within a week of the training can help verify that the driver's license is not suspended, right? That's obviously always a good thing. If the trainee has too many DUIs or an excessive record, they might not be hireable. I know FMCSA doesn't require you to get MVR, but you're doing a huge service to the person for their future and taking their money to get a CDL and to go get that job. DOT med card, pretty standard on those things. Bottom right corner, right, it says CLP, yes or no. Verify that it says yes on that. If not, send it back. We had 2 students from a town up north get a medical card last week, and we always check the number on there, the registration number for the medical card examiner, and that examiner actually had expired. And so those medical cards that he was handing out were not valid. So we got a refund from that person and they went to another person. So verifying that information, if we didn't do that and we didn't collect that information, that person essentially had an illegal medical card that if you got pulled over while you're cruising around with the student is actually not valid at all. So verification of that is good for your business. And the drug test in the event of an accident, if the other vehicle is towed away or someone is hurt, DOT drug test will be required by the trainee. What if they test positive? I would say if they test positive, I mean, I really hope you had a negative drug test on file, right? As soon as that person, before that person started class, because at least then you've done your due diligence to do a drug test on that person. But if you didn't have anything and the guy gets a positive drug test, man, that is just not a very good situation for anybody. So doing drug tests are a good thing. They're not required by FMCSA, but they are a good thing. They're good for public safety, and they're good for the person that you're putting behind the wheel of that vehicle as well. Quick overview. So documents collect on your trainees, student or your students, commercial learner's permit, CLP, driver's license, or current CDL if they're upgrading, motor vehicle record, DOT card, and DOT drug test. Not hard, pretty easy stuff. As far as the overall recap on that, you could do the self-certification letter. I don't know if I'm allowed to say you can recommend or not recommend that. It just doesn't sound like good business practice. CLP or driver's license, motor vehicle record, DOT med card, drug test. If your training program submits theory training, all modules must be documented at 80% or higher. So have that on file. If the training is conducted by a third party and submitted to the TPR by the third party, that provider will retain those records. So you can submit as a provider, you can submit the behind the wheel and range, totally fine, and someone else can submit the theory part, but someone cannot submit the range and then another entity submit the road. The same entity has to submit the road and range together. Document when the trainees demonstrate proficiency for behind the wheel and public range. So there's your documents right there that you want. Digital or paper documentation must be kept for 3 years. So someone walks into your front door from FMCSA and wants to audit you, proficiency documentation on what we went over, 80% or higher on the theory, and self-certification, and these two, but I would suggest grabbing these ones as well. So those are your files right there you are going to want. Any questions on that one?
There were a few questions and some that might just be easier to chat about. Somebody in particular had discussed a little bit earlier. They asked for a link for like a good English language assessment. So I'll put together a couple different ones that you can send out a follow-up email for. Most of those independent sites or assessments will cost money. For us, we at Drive 509 send our students to the local community college. It's free. Most of the colleges or community colleges have free English assessments for students. It's also good in that way because it's consistent for you as a school. There's no interpretation on your part. And then they offer pretty much classes at $25 a quarter if they don't meet your certain level of standard that you choose to set, if that's helpful at all. Another person asked,
is it Michael there?
Yeah.
If someone doesn't receive 80% or better, do they have a certain amount of retakes and are all the tests required to be kept with the file? So there is actually, and I think it's Indiana, they're actually only allowed so many retakes in a certain amount of time on there. Some of the larger companies that we work with that have like 13 locations, we actually have it set up in CDL PowerSuite where they take the theory and they have 3 attempts on the quizzes in the theory to get it right. So 3 is kind of that sweet spot on there that they can rotate through, but you just have to keep a record of 80% or better on each one. Nowhere in the CFRs is a state that you have to have every attempt in there. It just has to show that they passed a certain amount, or they passed with at least 80% on that. It does not say how many times on there. I think that would be more dialed down to the state specific part of it.
Another question Dale Hickman had asked was, does CDL PowerSuite theory training retain documentation records for you?
Yes, 100%. You can actually see if students are in progress and what their percentages are at when they're taking the theory. And it'll tell you, he's at 80% or 90% on this lesson, 20% on this lesson. So they have to retake it. And what's really nice, it's actually built into the software where they can't, the theory cannot be submitted to the TPR unless every section is above 80%. So there's hard stops built into it to prevent information being submitted to the TPR that is not essentially accurate on there. So it's actually really great. You don't have to worry about the student not doing 80% or better, and you don't have to worry about your office people submitting information to the TPR if you're missing documentation that something isn't over 80%, because you can't submit it until it's over 80%.
Got a quick question for regarding submission, submitting to TPR. Now, if we do, for instance, we have a teacher who teaches the class, can his teacher aide or para educator, can he assist and submit the paperwork, or it has to be specifically by the teacher?
No, any admin, because I think like most schools are run by administrators, right?
Yeah.
Not instructors, and the administrators are the ones that that handle that stuff. So yeah, no, as far as submitting it to there, right? That's your organization that's submitting it, and it doesn't really matter who it is.
Perfect.
Submitting it. They do each get usernames, so I would at least make sure they have a username, so you have record of who is submitting that information. Ooh, any other questions?
I have a question. I don't know if you can answer it. I run a school in Wyoming, and I had a trainee who refused a drug test, walked out of it, claimed some kind of medical excuse. Is he required after he got his permit to go through a DOT SAT program, and can I touch him afterwards?
So did the person have their CLP already?
Yes, that's the only way that you can take a pre-employment DOT drug test is with a CLP.
Yep. So if he shows up and decides to walk out, that's considered a positive test. And that information, right, is then essentially submitted as a positive test. And so they do have to take the SAT program. But just so you know, it's not on the school to put the person through the SAT program. FMCSA actually considers students trainees. They actually consider them owner-operators. So they have to do that on their own. And they're the ones that will be facilitating that with anyone in your town that actually will put them through that process. But it's not on you as the school to make sure that person does that. It is on them to make sure they do that.
So after they complete that DOT SAT program, can I still train them even with that on their clearinghouse account?
Yes, they have to complete that program. And I know Angie does a little bit into that. Do you have anything to add to that, Angie?
No, you did a nice job answering that. Exactly right.
Yeah, just going through the program is really what they want. Yeah. So in Washington State, right, or a lot of other states now, right, marijuana is legal. So I wish students would just be honest and tell you when they're signing up, you know, hey, I smoke marijuana, and unfortunately they don't, and then they show up for the test, and then they want to walk out, and all they have to do is be honest with you and make a solution to stop doing it and move forward. But unfortunately, they don't always, you know, go that route.
I actually did think of something. So we're not technically their employers, if that makes any sense. So we did just recently go through all of this with the clearinghouse and the FMCSA on our end too. So the students themselves are supposed to register in the clearinghouse as a student driver if they're just going to your school independently and not through an employer. If they're being sent by an employer, the employer should be registering them in the clearinghouse, and the process should be different. When they register as a student driver in the clearinghouse, they are also supposed to designate their third-party consortium. They're basically supposed to self-enroll and find that person. And so then that person is the one technically responsible for making sure they go through the SAT program, not you technically, unless you are their employer that's putting them through, if that makes any sense. There was another question too about the documentation of paperwork. Some people were asking if just keeping a transcript of like the behind the wheel, range, and theory training was enough for the documentation purposes. And I can let you talk to that, but my understanding is that you have to have the actual itemization of like the quizzes themselves, and then some system to show how they demonstrated proficiency on the behind the wheel and range training, right?
Yeah, you'll want something that connects your instructor that's signing off on proficiency on that. As far as like a transcript goes, yeah, having a transcript that will show all of the different theory lessons and all of their scores, all of the scores on the proficiency for the range and the row time, super awesome. As far as actually, you know, saying, hey, this person is proficient, having some documentation of, you know, the instructors that signed off on that person. I think would be pretty valuable to you. So it's the goal was an hour. It's 12:01. We cruised through the FMCSA portion of this on that. I'll keep going on this, so if people want to hang out and continue, I'll just keep cruising. I think I just got a couple more sections here. Yes, probably about 25 minutes is all it is. But if you do have to get off, it is 12. I really appreciate you guys showing up and being part of this. So I'll cruise into this real quick here. So essentially paperless, right? If you're currently using paper for all your registrations, I still urge you to find some non-paperless solutions. They will so help in your processes. 100% paperless. We work at a lot of schools, and you know, it's like, well, I can't do paperless because of this or that, or I have to have documentation that states this. I threw out a little thing on here. They actually created a law on June 30th, 2000 that a electronic document will hold up in court just as equal as a paper document. So if you're worried about, you know, legally having a signature versus having a digital signature, they're both legally binding, the same as a written signature. So on that piece, you don't have anything to worry on that part. This is about the little act right here, the e-sign act. On that one, you can read about it online. Really, the biggest thing on the e-sign act was the intent to sign. The signature must be made with the intent to adopt the terms associated with the intent. Kind of like people have the little boxes you click, right? Yes, I agree to this, I agree to this. And transparency of the document and its clauses must be fully transparent. Can't be hiding anything. Consent. The electronic document or signing platform must include a clause that the client agrees to this, right? Which is that little tiny box. And those little boxes you click and then sign, those boxes are called click wrap, is what they're called if you wanted to look them up. All right, simplify enrollment processes. What barriers are preventing you from utilizing digital enrollments? Is it the jump from the paper because you've been using it for so long? Does the digital world scare you? Have you not found the perfect solution yet? What's holding you back? we've realized a lot of the schools we work with, right? When we do things for so long, it's hard to go off of that. But I promise you, man, COVID changed a lot of things for the positive in the work world, I would say, and making things digital was one of those. Simple solutions. So CDL PowerSuite has this really great feature in there under our student services where you can do a digital enrollment agreement. You can create custom terms and conditions. You can create custom data fields, custom registration emails. So the email you send to your student is actually exactly what you want it to say when they register. Training digital signatures, payment processing. The digital signature will also sign for the admin on their side, and digital downloadable PDFs. All places that are, let me say this right. If your school is connected to an education board, you are required to give, right, the actual enrollment agreement that is signed to the student, which means you might have to print off like a 30-page document every time someone signs up and you hand that to them. That is a lot of paper. If you're doing 20 or 30 students a month, that is a lot of printing, and we all know ink is actually not cheap at all. CDL PowerSuite, when they sign up in the student's portal, they actually have a downloadable PDF version of their enrollment agreement signed by them and signed by the administrator. So you don't have to print it out. They can have it and access it whenever they want. So if you're still doing paper, you got to stop doing paper. Any questions on that one? That was just a quick little easy one as far as using paper versus digital. Nobody has any? I'll cruise through real quick. Oh, if you're audited, how to access the testing done in CDL PowerSuite. So I'll show you something here real quick. Let's pull a little screen up. So the information, I'll show you real quick, this is all, it's just all fake information on our demo side. But as far as looking up all your testing done, I'll see if I got any current ones on here. If I pull up one of these students on here, Brian as an example, it actually has, so you got all your range stuff, you got your road stuff, you got your pre-trip on there and others. So if I go on here on the straight back piece, I can see that Luke signed off on this person on 11 at 12:03. And these are just testing, right? So if they look the same, they're just demo versions on here. But it'll accurately record everything every instructor does. And if I were to go into this student and open up their profile, and let's go attendance, I also have everything signed off on here, and you can see it records everything for you on how they did on the road for every single drive that they did, how well they did. And we got this little export button right here. If I click this little export, it'll push out a whole entire PDF of every single thing on this person from the beginning until the end, with when they tested. At the end, all the instructors that they were with, it'll print out everything that you need to hand to an auditor that shows the journey of that trainee in your program. Hope that answered your question for you, Mark. All right, I'll cruise on to the next one real quick. Increase revenue utilizing CDL PowerSuite instructor services. So we all know our biggest costs, right? Labor, trucks, insurance. Biggest cost running a training program, labor. Really, it's the wasted labor hours that are the cost. Equipment, a sitting truck is the most expensive truck, just like a truck driving down the road with no load is the most expensive truck. Insurance, sitting trucks covered by insurance are not making money. If you have your truck insured and it's not being utilized, right? Sitting there costing you money. And then you have fuel and repairs. We all know if we do more of this, these go up, but the percentage that you make off of these, right, covers these all the time. Instructors and trainers should never show up and not know what they are doing that day. Training in the CDL environment is Groundhog's Day, and right, we do the same thing every single day. One of my biggest pet peeves was people showing up for work and saying, what do we do today? Especially an instructor, they do the same thing, right, every single day. Ooh, somebody have a question? Ooh, I'll just mute that right there. There we go. Instructors and trainers must never show up, right? So let's see what that looks like. How do we utilize labor and equipment? What's the solution? Create schedules your instructors and trainees can follow. I've been to some schools where they'll have 5 to 10 instructors show up and 30 students show up, 7 o'clock in the morning, and then they make the schedule for the day. That is horrible. You're going to waste an hour of 5 to 10 instructors' labor, so probably like $200 or $300 every single morning. 300 days a year, standing there figuring out what to do. When your instructors and your trainees show up in the morning, everyone should always know what they're doing. They should know the day before and the day before what they're doing. Utilizing labor and equipment. So in CDL PowerSuite, I took the concept of you walking into the airport and checking your flight. What gate am I at? When does it depart? What equipment is it in? Is it right? What airline is it? Utilizing that concept and putting that, essentially, we have a couple big, huge 65-inch screens in our shop that everyone shows up. They check the schedule. The students can actually check the schedule in their own portals. The instructors can check them in their own portals as well. So everyone knows what they're doing, honestly, before they even show up for the day. So I did a little math here just so you can kind of see what that looks like when you maximize your equipment. So your instructors, like if you have designated road instructors, right, they should be able to do 7 hours of road time every single day. If you were to take a student out on a 20-day program for an hour every single day, you're actually gonna get a minimum of 15 hours of drive time. If you start taking them out on Wednesday the first week, they're gonna get 18 hours of drive time. And you don't have to cram it all in 1 week. If you disperse the time over their whole entire training, their success rate is a lot better because they're just, they're building on that every single day. But if you do a little bit of math, $4,500 tuition, 28 trainees, you can see there's a lot left over. But if you don't utilize your labor and people just show up and they figure out what they're going to do when they show up, this number isn't going to be 7 hours. It's going to be 6.5, or it's going to be 6 hours. And when you do that, you're not going to be able to take care of your trainees as much, which means you're not going to be able to have as many trainees because you can't get them enough road time. Some states require a minimum amount of road time. Some states don't require a minimum amount of road time. We all know what students need and when they're feeling proficient on that. Let's cruise to the next one. People like consistency. Creating future schedules help everyone stay on track. It creates structure for your instructors and also for your trainees. The daily planner in there is essentially your flight schedule to your business every single day. And when people fill up and everything's green at the end of the day, you actually know that all of your students were taken care of. That makes it really simple. Any questions on that piece? I think I just got one more after this. I don't see any. I'll just cruise into the last one. All right, first time pass rate, CDL PowerSuite Instructor Insights. So we all know in a lot of states, scheduling a CDL test sometimes can be a month out or 2 months out or 3 weeks out, but it's never really 3 days out or 4 days out. If you look at the average pass rate across the US, it's actually at like 50% for first time pass rate, which means half of everyone that goes to take their test is failing on there. And for me, that is extremely low. It's really, really, really bad. And what that says is training providers are sending students to go take their final exam before they're even ready for their final exam. So in a sense, not preparing students to be successful for the test is what's pushing the test farther back, because instead of 1,000 students in the state maybe doing 1.5 tests, right, they're doing 2 tests or 3 tests, which is doubling the amount of time those testers need now to manage or to schedule all of those students. So I'll dig a little into here on some ideas for you for getting your first time pass rate, into that 80% mark, because it actually is not hard at all. How many final exams should it take a training to pass? I think you should take 1. Sometimes students get nervous, they bump a curb. You can't prevent everything, but if you take that average across, right, you should be able to get an average of 1. Are we sending proficient students? FMCSA entry-level driver training requires all trainees to demonstrate proficiency before submitting their information to the TPR. Keyword: proficient. Proficiency does not mean submitting students to the TPR and scheduling their final exam before their training time, because their training time is up. When the program's up and the person's like, hey, you're all done, go take your test, and he's not ready and you send him anyway, there are alternatives to helping that person be successful. The one is getting, when he's actually at your school, is making sure they're doing the best they can. I've gone to schools and you see chairs and picnic tables around. I've trained a couple thousand people. If you have chairs or picnic tables at your training program, I would throw them away, get rid of them, or take them home. because you know when you go to the yard, when people are sitting, they're not practicing, they're not doing the things that they should be doing. CDL school is a continuous rotation of let's go, let's learn, go do your pre-trip, go do your backing, let's go on the road. It is nonstop, and your instructors have to communicate that every single Monday to those people coming in. What does FMCSA say about proficiency? The state administered CDL skills exam. Oh, here it is. Training submitted to the TPR must be proficient in all ELDT certified CFRs defined in Appendix 380, right? So everything we just went over. I have a little section here. This is a part of people being removed from the TPR list. If you've noticed, you can go now on the FMCSA website and you can look at places that have been removed from the TPR list, and you can look at schools that are under review on the TPR list, right? Which is something none of us want to be on, right? That's our butter, that's our bread, that's how we feed everybody. This little section, removal from the training provider registry, facts considered, the state administered CDL exam passage rate applications for the Class A CDL, Class B passenger endorsements and or school bus endorsement who complete the provider's training and the CDL knowledge test pass rate for applicants for the hazardous material endorsement who complete the provider's training. What this is really saying is if your pass rate is horrible, they're going to go see why your pass rate is horrible. Everyone that does a test gets their information submitted into systems, right? Systems, CISTIMS, is owned by AMVA. AMVA is the American Motor Vehicle Association Training Americans. It's something like that. It's a lot of acronyms. But AMVA owns systems. Systems are what all of the state testers put their information into. So FMCSA has the data to correlate pass rates, right, with data submitted to the TPR, so they can see all those things. So when you do submit people and they're not ready, just know if your pass rates are becoming super low, there is a removal consideration in there if it gets too low. Reporting to the TPR, you all know when you submit someone to the TPR, it certifies that says, hey, no, this person is proficient and I'm going to submit them to the TPR. So they do make sure you essentially, right, do the little click wrap button and click on there. This one was just a little update screenshot I grabbed. What is the definition of proficiency? A high degree of competence or skill experience. He demonstrated his proficiency in Chinese. Mastery, experience, capability, skillfulness. Sending people to the TPR is not because they're done with the program. Sending people to the TPR is because they're proficient. How do we achieve a consistent level of proficiency? Instructors should not be signed off on trainees until they are proficient in the task that is being trained. That is so important. You're training someone, sign off on them when they are proficient. CDL PowerSuite actually has an ELDT ready button that they can push that puts this little checkbox here. And we also have another option where you can put like 3 boxes there. And so a different instructor or the same instructor has to sign off on that person 3 times, 2 times, 1 time, 4 times, how many times you want. But it creates a little more consistency to, sign off on someone that is proficient. Hold instructors accountable. Training program standards, right? So you send your students out to your instructors and you've done your job. You brought them into the school. You've collected everything you can. It's 100% right now on them to make them successful, right? But we have to make sure we've given our instructors the tools to be successful. So create a standard your instructors can follow. Just remember, these are truck drivers. They're not teachers. So connecting those dots is something that has to be created, and that's something we have to do. Make sure all instructors are following the same standard. Do not push trainees through if they are not performing to standard, meaning just don't submit them to the TPR, go take your test, and you failed, maybe you'll pass, the next time. If they're not proficient, don't send them. Make everyone aware of the hard stops that will prevent a trainee from taking their final exam. And I know you're all thinking, well, the guy's done with his training and he doesn't have any more money, right? Now I can't just let him sit here forever, but he needs more training. Like, what do I do? When your student shows up on Monday, it is beyond crucial that you set a standard, a precedent of what is expected of the student from day one for them to be scheduled for their final CDL. Just like if you have a student that waits till the last week to learn their pre-trip, it's the same thing. You have to set the standard in the very, very beginning. So holding trainees accountable is going to be essentially your goal to getting people where they need to be at the end of their training. If you don't have that standard and you don't have essentially something that's set up to say you need to be here at this time, they will get to the end and they will fail. It's the craziest thing ever is they'll pay, $4 or $5 grand to go to your school and they'll sit on a picnic table for 4 weeks. And then wonder when their test is. And it's super unfortunate, but I see that all the time. So create a written policy trainees sign in your enrollment agreement stating final exams will not be scheduled if proficiency is not met by the end of the program. Paying money to go to school does not guarantee you a CDL, and they need to know that. Uphold your training program standards. Pre-trip, demonstrate you can pass the pre-trip or you don't test. So at our school, Dry 509, some of the biggest fail rates actually are pre-trip across the US and are the air supply, which is why Florida is trying to get FMCSA to allow them to, if they fail the pre-trip, that they can just go onto the backing and the road because there's so many fails on that. What that just tells me is the guy can't do a pre-trip and you want him to go drive on the road. That just seems, to a person that believes in safety on the road, that just does not seem right. So if you want students, trainees, to learn the pre-trip and say, you don't get your final test unless you learn it. And we have in our policy that if you fail your air supply or your not your air supply or your pre-trip at your CDL test, you will pay $1,800 to come back. And you're probably like, oh, that's crazy. But no one ever pays the $1,800 because no one ever fails it, because they actually take the initiative to pass it, because they don't have $1,800. If you create hard stops and you put them in your program, you will get people more motivated to get things done. If you don't have hard stops, they will be lazy and they won't do the things they're supposed to, and you will have people hanging over and you will have to figure out what to do with them. After that, either it's going to cost you more money or you're going to let them go for free, or they have more money to pay. But putting these things in the beginning, the very first day they show up, is so important to their success when they're done with the program. Demonstrate you can perform the backing maneuvers or you don't test. Demonstrate you can safely maneuver the vehicle on public roads or you don't test. At Dry 509, we do not send students that are not proficient in any of these tasks. We say no. Our pass rate is so good that we have state auditors come and test our testers to verify that we are not pulling a scam on our pass rate and we're not paying someone off, essentially, because we are so far above the standard. It's not that we're not doing we're doing things different. We're just not sending the student when he's not ready. And that's all it is. Send the student when he's ready and he will pass the first time and they'll move on. And it doesn't cost you any more money to do that if you put a standard in the beginning that you can uphold for those people. Last little piece here, and then we'll wrap this up. So connect the data points. We have this super rad, amazing thing that I love built into CDL PowerSuite, that it actually has your pass rates, your fail reasons, could not find gears, failed air supply. It has the range time that that instructor has done, and it also has their behind the wheel road and their pre-trip, based on how you can record data in CDL PowerSuite and how you can schedule a final exam. It takes that analytics, it takes what they failed on, and it compiles it all for you right here, and you can actually see how your instructors are doing. Your instructors actually get rated by your students just like you would when you go do an Uber drive. It's essentially a self-training instructor tool that incentives instructors to do better. The instructors can view this information. They can see it. They can see how well they're doing. They can see feedback students are giving them. You're literally just putting in their hands something that they can monitor how well they're doing with your clients and their clients. It's the coolest thing. It is the coolest thing ever. It's really fun to watch. Thank you for joining us today. First webinar. I'm learning it takes me a little longer to get through slides than I expected.